Welcome to this week's episode of Active Measures. This week we are talking about the Kremlin strike on the DNC and the DCCC back in 2016 when they used their very well documented active measures to effectively swing the election for Donald Trump. And they were rewarded today, I must say, Olga, because what I saw today from the President of the United States was terrifying. And the Secretary of Defense, who terrifies me every single day. I want to welcome our friends here in the United States and to people around the world who might have been watching what we all watched today. I want you to know that we are even more horrified than you must be watching what is going on. I want to spend just a few minutes, Olga, talking about this because it's not particularly tied to the subject at hand, but I think it's important to talk about. From my perspective, the president effectively declared war on American citizens, and the Secretary of Defense told the military that their hands are untied, that any rules of engagement that they might have abided by last time did not matter, that if they violated them by, say, I don't know, raping somebody or beating somebody to death or otherwise engaging in behavior that would have gotten them court-martialed before, it's okay. And he said that right before the president effectively said that the military should practice on American cities. These men and some women, he fired most of the women who were sitting there today, took an oath to the Constitution. They did not take an oath to Donald Trump. And the difficulty for them, Olga, I think, and this is important, is what do they do now? Because they have been conditioned to obey orders. They have been conditioned to listen to their commander-in-chief, who typically would give orders that were constitutional and in line with what they took an oath to defend. But now they have to make a choice. And you saw their reaction. They sat still. They were basically, I think, in horror, much like the rest of us. But they need to consult with private lawyers, I think, on this. Not just, he's fired all the JAG, the head of the JAG, so they can't really consult with the head of the Army JAG or the Judge Advocate General, the military lawyers, the Army JAG, the Air Force JAG, the Navy JAG. I don't know what I would be doing if I were a general listening to that, because he's effectively said that they need to go to war against their own people. We have not seen anything like this ever in the history of this country, ever. And I mean, the Civil War was an actual war where people were seceding. It was not the government declaring war on its own people. And for people who don't live in the cities, who think this is just an urban problem, he's coming for the cities first, but he's got to come for everybody. If you don't obey, he will come for you. I don't know what you thought, Olga, about this. The New York Times certainly doesn't agree with me. The New York Times said that wasn't the purpose of this wasn't really clear, and why are we doing this? And I think this is what the New York Times said. There does not seem to be a clear point or purpose on President Trump's address to military generals today. I thought the purpose was very clear, and I think he was very clear-eyed, despite the fact that he seemed like he was drugged about what he was saying, and that's exactly what I just said. Don't know what your thoughts on this are.
I wish I could be shocked, but I actually wrote a dictator guide in November, literally. Predicting all of this. Of course he's gonna turn the military. There's not one authoritarian who doesn't use the military and intelligence services and all agencies within a government to turn it against their own citizens, to quash protests, to, silence dissent, to shut down organizations that are investigating corruption or human rights or, and same thing with opposition parties. So I wish I was shocked, but I'm not shocked at all. I knew this was coming. And I remember in November talking to a few people, and they said, "How do you see this ending?" And at that point, they looked at me like I was 10 heads, which is the case every time I say something that ends up playing out. But I told them that the worst case scenario is that we might have a military coup, because if Trump orders the military to, I don't know, run down protesters, massacre 100 plus protesters like Yanukovych did in Ukraine, what Assad did in Syria, disappearing hundreds of thousands of people, sending body parts, back to their family members. If he orders these type of egregious crimes, especially if it's something that is very public, like Tiananmen Square, or like when Putin cracks down and you have a whole wall of thugs beating, protesters, the military is going to have to make a decision. Where is their oath, to the Constitution or to a madman? And that's it. And, at that time, the people I was talking to, they were like, oh, stop, maybe Congress. I said, Congress is useless.
Useless.
Congress is not going to do anything. They're not going to rein him in. If we win the House back, and that is a big, big if we happen to have even an election where military isn't taking the role of Russia's military in Crimea, when they stood over your head with a gun and said, oh, so what are you voting for? So if we happen to have, an election, then Democrats, if they win, can at least start slowing some of the things down. But we are going to come to an ultimate situation where there's something. I mean, right now, this country, it's like a tinderbox. And all it takes is one situation somewhere where the military does something that is going to cause an uprising amongst everyone. And I'll remind, there is more of us than them. My mom, being with her Soviet mentality, is like, oh my God, but how are people going to protest? What about the mercenaries? What about the military? And I told her, listen, there's 330 million of us. Even if 5 million come out, this overpowers Proud Boys and mercenaries and military and everything. I'm not saying we have to be violent. The best movements have been peaceful, but it is going to come to something, because we cannot have an occupation of cities, which is what's happening. I mean, I never thought I'd live in a country. I mean, this is what we all escaped from, to have our cities occupied by the military. I never thought that we'd have, military touching American civilians for trying to speak out and protest our enshrined in the Constitution. But here we are. And it's not just happening to migrants. It's happening to US citizens who are being, picked up, beaten, by military and federal agents. So we are at, there will be some kind of a decisive point where the military is going to have to decide, is this the route they want? Is this how they want the United States to be represented around the world? Because Tiananmen Square happened how many decades ago? And this is still one of the most cited examples anytime you're talking about a domestic crackdown.
Okay, well, on that note, let's move to what we're here to talk about, which is how Donald Trump got here in the first place. And I do want to say to people, listen, on the very first day of Trump's very first presidency, and I don't think this is the second presidency, I think this is the second of, I don't think he's leaving except, you know, when he shuffles off this mortal coil. I don't believe that he's building a ballroom in the White House and putting in
Yeah.
a patio because he's going to vacate this place in 3 years. It's not going to happen 3.5 years. So let's talk about how he got here and who put him here. And who put him here are the Russians, as we talk about every week. One of the ways they did this so effectively, and speaking of the New York Times, which again was a useful idiot to this whole thing, is that, Olga, they
Even now.
even now,
And you
even
just read a few sentences of
even
this
now,
meeting.
even now, but back then for sure. Because while they were busy publishing stories about Hillary's emails, and Russian hacked information that they never should have published, including, as we talked about last week, the risotto recipe of um, John Podesta, Hillary's um, chairman of Hillary's campaign. What was going on was that the Kremlin was running probably the best intelligence operation for your money that you could possibly buy. A small investment that paid dividends, including what we talked about just now, which is that this country is on the cusp of a war. An internal war. I wouldn't say a civil war, but a war of our government going to war against its own people. How that all began was through two Russian intelligence-led operations, one called Cozy Bear and one called Fancy Bear. And Olga, why don't you talk about those? Because those are things that people need to know about.
So, just to backtrack, we, with this series, laid the groundwork in the first 9 chapters of how Russia started infiltrating around 2008. I mean, they've always infiltrated, but specifically for the 2016 election, how they started infiltrating the NRA, the Republican Party, the evangelical community, and various things. Now, with this chapter, we begin um, their shift to operational things that they were carrying out. So, in 2015, July 2015, just after Trump announced his election, Russia got to work. And the first thing that they did was hack the DNC. They sent one of their SVR hacking units, cyber units, to hack into the DNC and to
The SVR is Russian Foreign Intelligence. It's basically their CIA.
yeah.
Go on.
So they sent their SVR hacking units to get into the servers and to start sit there, basically collect information, sit there, watch what was happening inside of the DNC. And this was 1 month after Trump came down the escalator. The following year, in the spring, April, I believe, then you had the GRU, which is Russia's military intelligence, which for the most part carried out their, cyber attacks across the world. They came in to the DCCC. And here you have, Russia sending their intelligence operatives to hack into the infrastructure of the Democratic Party in order to, exfiltrate information that could then be fabricated, altered, and weaponized against Hillary Clinton. And at that time, it wasn't clear whether Hillary would be, the nominee. We still didn't get to the convention, but to both sow distrust within the Democratic Party, but at the same time, to collect dirt. Very important to note that at the same time, in the summer of 2016, that Russian intelligence also hacked into the RNC. So they are sitting on all these files, all this information, the communications, opposition research, and everything else in the Republican Party. But they never chose to use it because their main goal was to do everything they can in their power not to allow Hillary Clinton to step foot into the White House. And they were confident that she would be the nominee. And the operation was built around her, uh, again, starting in the late 2000s.
I want to talk about something that I don't think really most people talked about back then, and I didn't really think much about until I started, we started writing this chapter. And I think it's relevant, especially in light of Jim Comey's indictment this past week, and the fact that he's been back in the news. So in 2015, the FBI began its investigation of Hillary Clinton's email server to see whether she had any classified information on her personal server that she used. It was dumb of her to do it, but it was not it did not rise to the level of insanity that it began to be covered as at all. What ended up happening was that there was such mistrust between Comey and Hillary because Comey was doing this so openly and so publicly, and the Republicans were playing the refs, which was Comey, so well that it ended up resulting in Comey doing this big announcement in July of 2016 saying, I'm not going to recommend indictments against Hillary Clinton for what she did, and the but went on and on and on and on. And that became the story. Completely inappropriate of him to do. Because typically, if somebody, first of all, he's the FBI director, he doesn't get to indict anybody. But typically, when a prosecutor announces an indictment, or charges for that matter, they hold a press conference and they say, I'm charging, Olga with whatever, I'm charging Julie with whatever, or
And
the grand jury has returned an indictment. And this is what we believe they did. If they don't do that, if there are no indictments or charges brought, they don't announce anything. They just let it go, because otherwise you're basically smearing somebody who did nothing illegal, right? Is there something you want to jump in?
no, I just wanted to say that it's very key. They hold the press conference after charges are unsealed. They'll
Right.
never hold a press
Ever.
conference in an hour. We are about to do this. First, they unseal the charges, the indictment goes through, and when, everyone has a chance to read it, that is when they do it. I
He
mean,
did
there's
it.
very, procedures for this.
He did it to cover his ass. I don't know how
Hmm.
else to say it. He did it because he was worried that the Republicans were going to say that he was not charging Hillary because he was being political, because he worked for Democratic administration, even though Comey has always been a Republican. So therefore, he was basically giving both sides what they wanted. He thought he gave Hillary the non-indictment, and then he gave the Republicans all the talking points to use against her anyway. It was he should have been fired for that. Just completely inappropriate for a prosecutor to do. He was not even a prosecutor. He was the director of the FBI who was going to either recommend or not recommend charges based on what he found. He did not recommend charges. In the midst of this, now, the Russians are spearfishing and collecting all sorts of data. And Comey goes to the Democratic National Committee, even as he's investigating Hillary. And the FBI says to them, we believe the Russians are in your systems. We want you to turn over your servers, everything to us so that we can see what's going on. That is an absolutely reasonable request. However, there was so much mistrust between Democrats and the DNC and the leadership of the party at that point, and Jim Comey, because he was going overboard in this investigation of Hillary, that they failed to do that, and I think even failed to take him seriously. Eventually, they hired a firm called CrowdStrike, which is a very good firm, to look into it. And eventually, months, if not over a year after the Russians got into it, CrowdStrike said, oh, yeah, the Russians got into this and this is not good. But, I don't know that this is not really a Russian operation. They couldn't have predicted what Comey was going to do. But this incredible mistrust between the FBI and the DNC over Hillary's emails, I believe, allowed the Russians to stay in the DNC in their servers a lot longer than they would have, because Comey's warning kind of was looked at with skepticism, because I think they probably thought that he was trying to get to their servers to look for stuff to indict Hillary with, and not because the Russians were in them. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but that it just occurred to me as I was writing this that it just worked out so perfectly for the Russians, because all of these things all came together at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean, and that is the Russians' main goal, to cause this distrust
Yeah.
between agencies, between, parties, between people and the agencies, between people and all the institutions. I mean, this is their main goal. And being that they were so focused, I mean, every single unit in Russia, counterintelligence was working the 2016 operation. So they had every single, side covered of this, monitoring everything. One thing I'll add, at the same time that Russia was doing this here, they also hacked Macron's emails. They were carrying out a series of hacking operations to interfere in German elections, French elections, um, U.S. elections. So they, again, U.S. was their primary target at that moment, but just to show they were using the same exact tactics in across Europe, and they really refined or at least got a good experience with their tactics in Poland when there was that Waitergate operation where waiters put bugs on the in the restaurant where the party leaders were visiting. Those bugs got, they taped their conversations. Also, at the same time, Poland was under a cybersecurity attack. Again, same thing. Information data was exfiltrated out of a few agencies, and this resulted in basically throwing the Polish election. And they used it also as a test to see, what worked, what didn't, before they did the same in the United States.
Yeah, and I think this is something that we need to really bear in mind because the timeline of this is pretty incredible, right? The Russians get into the Cozy Bear, which was the first one, um, which was not meant to create a firestorm. That was the SVR one. It got in very quietly, burrowed in, was never meant to be discovered, was meant to collect quiet information. That was in 2015. Um, and Fancy Bear, the GRU one, the military intelligence one, that came in 2016 and really just much more aggressive. But if you look at the timeline of this, in July 2015, the FBI opens its investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server, right? Then Comey testifies later on this that he first warned the DNC about Russian intrusion in September of 2015. So about 3 months or so after he comes in, 2 months after he comes, the Russians, after he opens the investigation into Hillary. And he kept, according to him, he kept warning them. The FBI kept contacting the DNC IT contractor through early 2016. So we're talking about months, about 9 months of the DNC doing nothing, despite these warnings, presumably because they were concerned that Comey was just not to be trusted and that he was using this as an excuse. Comey then, and not just Comey, the intelligence operation, we talked about this last week, but the intelligence community in the United States holds a press conference on October 7th, 2016, warning that the Russians were interfering in the election. That morning, that morning, the Access Hollywood tape drops, right? The FBI still, or not the FBI, the intelligence community still decides that they're going to go forward despite the fact that the world has exploded for all of us who remember October 7th and what happened that morning. Access Hollywood drops. Nobody talks about anything else. The FBI comes out and says, or the feds come out and say, oh yeah, the Russians are interfering in the election. Nobody pays attention because everybody's going crazy over this leak about the Access Hollywood tape, which I still actually have come around to thinking the Russians did in order to get attention away
I think
from.
Manafort did. This
Yeah,
is such a
Manafort. Well,
this has
Manafort.
such a Manafort. I've
Yeah,
always thought it
Manafort
was
did, but
too.
Manafort, of course,
Yeah.
has been a Russian cutout for a long time. We'll get to him in subsequent chapters. And then within hours, the first tranche of the Podesta emails drops, all through WikiLeaks. And everybody focuses on that. And that was, as we discussed last week, an entirely Russian operation hacked by Russian intelligence, given to WikiLeaks through a cutout called Guccifer, who pretended that he was some random Eastern European hacker. In fact, it was a GRU agent who did this, gave it to WikiLeaks. Whether Assange knew or didn't know is a different story, but, make up your own mind about that. And then WikiLeaks starts doing this in tranches, Podesta 1, Podesta 2, Podesta 3, Podesta 4, every single day. And the media, the New York Times among them, actually chief among them, gets obsessed and starts publishing these Podesta emails. Now, I will tell you, as I said, Podesta's emails were so stupidly, for the most part, irrelevant that it was a risotto recipe. My phone number got leaked, right, as part of these things. Who cares about my phone number, right, other than me because I had to change it? But I mean, these are things that were just not interesting to anybody, but yet the press kept going and going and going and going and going on this. The one thing that was interesting in the Podesta emails that also created a tremendous amount of tension was that Donna Brazil, who at the time was the deputy chair of the DNC, and then after the first leaks about Debbie Wasserman Schultz kind of putting her finger on the scale to help Hillary in the middle of the Sanders-Clinton primary, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, as a congresswoman from Florida, resigns as the chair of the DNC. Donna Brazil steps up, and then as part of these Podesta leaks, it comes to light that Donna Brazil was secretly giving questions in 2 debates to Hillary Clinton that she had gotten through her work, I believe it's CNN and ABC. And that created a massive firestorm and tremendous distrust, again, right before the election between the Sanders people and the Clinton people. And enough of them went to vote for Russian cutout Jill Stein. She took enough votes from Hillary in swing states to win the election. And that, my friends, is how Russia interfered in the 2016 election. Thank you and good night. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Olga.
And I just want to add, not only did it push people towards Jill Stein, you had a lot of people with the Bernie camp, his supporters who just didn't vote after this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it both suppressed the vote and that. I will add one more interesting tidbit that you had this Guccifer cutout, which was Russian intelligence. They did reach out to Roger Stone and communicated with them, I believe Don Jr. And also, Jared Kushner at the time owned a New York paper, The Observer.
New York Reporter.
And it was very interesting that Guccifer was at the time, leaking hacked material, and that The Observer had several exclusives from Guccifer that they did go ahead and publish. So again, I don't know if Jared Kushner coordinated ahead of time or if he was just a chosen paper, for these exclusives. But it is interesting because then it ties again all of this back to Trump and his family and his campaign. And that's it. And same thing with Roger Stone, who was at the time on the outside of his campaign, running all the dirty operations for Trump, and attempting to coordinate with Russians. So that is an interesting part of this because Guccifer never got as much attention. Occasionally there has been mention of them, and I believe, I forgot which outlet did post text messages between Roger Stone and Guccifer via Twitter, DM. But that is an important tidbit with the Kushner because, everyone looks at him and Ivanka as like like that they have their hands clean with everything, and meanwhile they're always in the center, whether it be
Well,
Ivanka's real estate deals with Russian mafia in Panama or Baku with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard or wherever. They're always in the center of, where there's fire.
Lori asks if we feel the Steele dossier is accurate. Some parts of it definitely are. Don't forget what the Russians do is, and this is, they seed nonsense in the middle of real stuff. So do I think the P-tape is real? I don't know, but it made for a very convenient thing to say it was not real so that the rest of it was discredited. I think a lot of it is not discredited at all. I think it's raw information that probably should have been vetted, but there's stuff in there, I'm sure, that was incredibly accurate. I don't know what you think about that, Olga.
There were accurate pieces of it. Definitely the part on the P-tape was a Russian operation because Trump can have 300 girls peeing on him. This is not a crime. That's his prerogative. So they basically move to the more salacious parts, look over here versus the actual financial transactions that Trump has had, with Deutsche Bank, with Russian oligarchs, with Russian mafia. The amount of investments and financial crimes is actually, it's not as sexy as the P-tape, but it is, what where the crimes are. So I do think it was a diversion. At least that part. I was frustrated with Democrats because forever they Republicans to this day you're going to hear this, that the Steele.ca was paid for by Hillary Clinton. And like people need to remember, it was the Republicans who started this, hired Fusion GPS to start doing opposition research on Trump. And I believe Lindsey Graham at the time was involved, and McCain, and eventually went to the Democrats. And I wish Democrats would push back on the origin, because if you listen to Republican version of events, you would think, that this was solely a production of the Clinton campaign, and not that it was their own party who actually started this opposition research.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are so many tentacles and there are so many things that happened, and were all of them orchestrated by Russia? No. Were there massive assists that the Democrats, because of their own stupidity, like Donna Brazile giving questions to the Hillary campaign, or the DNC putting its finger on the scale for Hillary in complete contravention of what the Democratic National Committee should have been doing? And I say that as somebody who was a Hillary supporter in 16, but the DNC is supposed to be absolutely impartial, and there's no excuse. So when that came to light, that of course created problems, and of course that made the Sanders people, as Olga said, either stay home, or some voted for enough voted for Jill Stein, or enough voted, third party, whether it was Jill Stein or somebody else. Was Hillary an ideal candidate? No, I don't. I think she made a lot of mistakes of her own. But understand how much assistance the Kremlin gave to Donald Trump. It was staggering, staggering. And it's so staggering that we are at chapter 10. I don't think Olga and I ever anticipated how long we're going to go here. I don't think we even know how long this is going to go, when this is going to end. But it is only now in chapter 10 that we've gotten to what they actually did. Everything else was a setup and a predicate for what was going to happen in 16. I mean, and their methods and their use of the stuff. I mean, that is just staggering. And these are not 500-word essays. These are sometimes 3,000-word essays that Olga and I are writing, because there's so much
5,000.
5,000, sometimes 5,000, because there's so much information. And it's so, everything we say is backed up. It's not like we have any secret intelligence information. Nobody's leaking to us. This is all stuff in the public domain. And the reason we're doing this is twofold. One is Trump pissed us both off by basically saying, not basically, he came out and said that, Russia was all a hoax. The interference in 16 was a hoax. And we both said enough is enough. This was definitely not a hoax.
Especially that it was going to go to indictments, which here we are. We have our first, with many more to come.
Yep. He's going to indict people who said that what happened, right? So that's one. Two is it's a warning, because it happened again in 20. It's happening today. It has not stopped. It has been encouraged. And it has led us to today at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. Eastern, when the President of the United States went to Quantico, Virginia, and had a meeting with every single general and admiral called in from abroad to meet in the United States, so that he can tell them that they better go along with American carnage on the streets of New York City and Chicago and Portland and Memphis and Atlanta and every other major city. And soon it won't be just the cities, it'll be the suburbs, and then it'll be the rural areas, because that is what autocrats do. And this is all the result of Russian interference in our political process, in our democracy. They are turning this into a mirror of what they are themselves, a dictatorship. They are winning the Cold War. I don't know how much more bluntly I could put it. Olga, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
The only thing that I will close with is that this is why it's so important for accountability. Everyone, I've heard so many comments, thrown at Ukraine, for instance. Oh, it's a corrupt country. Well, guess what? We had a treasonous president there. He fled to Russia. He was prosecuted in absentia, found guilty of treason. Ukrainians never wanted to, cover it up. They didn't want to sweep it under the rug and pretend it didn't exist. And he was held accountable. And accountability does work. Is it going to prevent everything in the future? No, but each step that you take towards accountability is, well, more that you're strengthening your democracy. We had, I mean, I can't even begin to tell you the amount, like Julie said, we'll probably end up with a million chapters of how many Americans welcomed and organized help with the Russians. In 2020, you had Giuliani running around, literally. I mean, American media and, the FBI is saying that the Russians are trying, intelligence is trying to, come to him and infiltrate. I was monitoring that step by step. It was opposite. Giuliani approached Russian intelligence in order to attack the 2020 election. So because there was no accountability after 2016, which under Trump it would have been hard, you had 2020. But then when Biden came in, I mean, we should have never hid everything that happened with the 2016 election. Because in the good old normal days, if you ever, acted on the behalf of a foreign intelligence services, you get investigated and prosecuted. Here you had a whole campaign, numerous people coordinating back and forth. I mean, Manafort, perfect example. In 2016, he handed polling data or voter data,
It was polling data. Yep.
polling data to Russian intelligence in their hand. And he got prosecuted for tax evasion. I mean, like, really? So if I murder someone, that means, I'll get prosecuted for a DWI? Like, and because of this, we are here. And if we ever do manage to get our country back, like really every single person must demand accountability, because if what is happening from 2015 to now isn't held accountable, we're never going to set a deterrent for stopping this type of takeover, hostile takeover of the U.S. government.
And I
Yeah.
will tell you, and this is from my years of Fox, so I will tell you this because I know it with every fiber of my being. They play the refs like nobody else, which is why you had the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, not investigating January 6th, not investigating anything Olga and I are talking about. And the reason for that is because he didn't want to appear political, heavens to Betsy, God forbid. While crimes were being committed, it's not political to investigate this. It is actually a national security issue that should have been investigated, prosecuted, and if juries found them guilty, convicted of sedition, of insurrection, of all the things that Trump is now accusing Democratic cities of engaging in, because that is what was going on, as opposed to what's going on in Portland right now, which is, I think, they're basically basket weaving and biking around, a great Northwestern city. So from that perspective, I think what the danger here is if we don't start playing the refs every single day as hard as possible. And by refs, I mean the New York Times. By refs, I mean the CNN. By refs, I mean MSNBC even. If we don't start playing the refs, this will continue to happen consistently because we don't insist that Democrats get a backbone. Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries may or may not cave, I don't know, but they caved, or certainly Jeffries said, and Schumer caved before on the budget. We got to start playing the refs. We've got to start putting pressure on the other side. And for anybody who's marching on the 18th, that's great. But my advice to you is don't give up. Don't let up. Keep playing the refs every single day. Talk about what we're talking about. We should not be writing this. The New York Times should be writing this. We say this every week, but it really infuriates me that Olga and I have to be the ones to do this. I mean, I'm glad we're doing it, but I'm furious.
Yeah, but it's really
Yeah.
like it should have national attention reach.
Yeah. So send it around to your friends. If you missed any of the previous chapters, go read them. They're in chronological order on either of our Substacks. Mine is Salty Politics. Olga's is Unmasking Russia. You'll see an Active Measures tab on both those Substacks. You could just go to either one and just read from chapter 1 on. Get prepared to be pissed off. Get prepared for a really long read if you do it all back to back. But That's where we are. So on that note, Olga, I realize it is Yom Kippur on Thursday, so I will not be here for Pax Americana. It is the one day of the year that I actually try to pretend to be a good human being, so I'm taking that day off. And, other
My
than
dad is the same way. He doesn't, he's not religious at all.
yeah, but that's what we're
Yom
doing.
Kippur is the one day.
The
He's like,
one
nope,
day. It's
nothing, just.
Yeah, it's the one day I'm gonna starve and be in a bad mood, so you don't wanna hear me anyway. But maybe we'll reschedule it maybe for Friday if you're available. We'll see. On that note, thank you to everybody who joined us today. Thank you for reading our Active Measure series. Thank you for watching Pax Americana on Thursday and Thursdays at 11, except for this Thursday. Um, and thank you for certainly for reading our Active Measure series on Mondays and joining us here on Tuesdays at 12:30 Eastern every Tuesday. Take a deep breath because we have a big fight ahead of us. So thanks, everybody. And we will see you next week. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.